Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you back in. And today, as we are entering into autumn here in the Northern Hemisphere, some of our focus turns to the harvest and Halloween. And rather than do a history of Halloween, I just wanted to focus on the ancient festival that it's based off of. And that would be the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. The Celts lived about 2,000 years ago, mostly in the areas that are now Ireland and the United Kingdom and northern France. They celebrated their new year on November 1st. The day marked the end of summer, end of harvest, and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, a time that's often associated with death. Living in these times, through the cold, dark winters, often resulted in loss of life. Individuals or whole families could be wiped out due to the weather or a poor harvest. The timing is approximately halfway between autumn and winter equinox. As the year transitioned from light to dark, it was thought that the boundary between this and the other world grew thin and open, allowing spirits to pass through, either to the other world or from the other world. It was one of the 4 Gaelic seasonal festivals and marked the end of the harvest. In addition to causing trouble and damaging crops, Celts thought that the presence of the otherworldly spirits made it easier for the Druids or the Celtic priests to make predictions about the future. For a people entirely dependent on the volatile, natural world, these prophecies were an important source of comfort during the long, dark winter. During Samhain, bonfires would be lit by the Druids, and costumes would be worn to ward off harmful spirits. Cattle would be slaughtered at the end of the harvest for sustenance as well as sacrifice. The hearth fires, which they had extinguished earlier in the evening, were relit from the sacred bonfire to help protect them during the coming winter. The other world contained spirits of the dead and fairies, which wreak havoc on livestock and winter crops at this liminal time. Having offerings and feasts was thought to appease these otherworldly entities and would ensure their animals and crops would survive the winter. Not only did fairies step into the world, but so did the spirits of their ancestors. During the Samhain meal, a place would be set for those seeking hospitality. If there's room at your table, if there's an open chair in your room, if there's room in your bed, the spirits may join you. According to the American Folk Life Center at the U.S. Library of Congress, Celts wore costumes to confuse the spirits now roaming our world and to avoid capture. This seems to show up in Gaelic stories involving Samhain. By 43 AD, the Roman Empire had conquered the majority of Celtic territory. In the course of the 400 years that they ruled the Celtic lands, two festivals of the Roman origin were combined with the traditional Celtic celebration of Samhain. The first was Veralia. It's a day in late October when Romans traditionally commemorated the passing of the dead. And the second was to honor Pomona, the goddess of fruit and trees. The symbol of Pomona is the apple, and the incorporation of this celebration into Samhain probably explains some of the traditions around apples, like popping for apples. That's practiced today on Halloween. By the 9th century, the influence of Christianity had spread into Celtic lands, where it gradually blended with and supplanted older Celtic rites. In 1000 AD, the church made November 2nd, All Souls' Day, a day to honor the dead. And it's widely believed that today that the church was attempting to replace the Celtic festival of the dead with a related church-sanctioned holiday. At the beginning, All Souls' Day was celebrated similarly to Samhain, with big bonfires, parades, and dressing up in costumes as saints and angels and devils. The All Saints' Day celebration was also called All Hallows or All Hallowmas. And the night before it, the traditional night of Samhain in Celtic region became called All Hallows' Eve, Halloween. There are various stories and traditions and rituals that took place all over different Celtic regions. I want to talk about a couple of them. The first is about Fionn McCool, or Finn McCool, which is not a bad name. Fionn was a legendary 3rd century warrior and later chieftain in medieval Ireland, who led the band of Irish warriors known as the Fianna, who were forest-dwelling mercenaries known as the Soldiers of Destiny, and created the Giant's Causeway. Fionn is connected to many of the legends in the Finian cycle. He first came to prominence after catching and eating the salmon of knowledge. These Finian tales were said to have been written as poems by Finn McCool's son and retold by the Irish people for generations. According to one of several stories recounted in the Tales of the Elders, every year at Samhain for 23 years, the fire-breathing creature, Aelin, would lull the men of Tara to sleep and burn the court to the ground during the night. In Irish mythology, Aelin was an incendiary being who played the harp and sung beautiful songs. Also called the Burner, he lived in the underworld. He was thought to be the personifications of darkness and chaos, death, drought, and blight. It was said that the she-fairy mounds were always open at Samhain, and these portals to the other world allowed the souls of the dead and supernatural beings to enter the mortal world. This allowed Aelin the opportunity to cross over every year, which he had done for 23 years. Some stories call him a goblin rather than a supernatural being of the underworld. Each year, High King of Ireland hosted a celebration, gathering at the capital for the lords, nobles, and local kings. Each year, the mobile fire-breather Alan lulled everyone to sleep with his music and burned down the palace. But one Samhain, a young Fionn McCool was there. Now, there are many legends with Fionn, so the timeline is blurred, but this could have been while he was serving the King of Bantry, or he was wandering on his travels, and he saw the party and joined. Either way, he heard the stories of Alan and how he put everyone to sleep with his music. Even the fearless Fianna, who guarded the palace under leadership of Gaul. But young Fionn had to plan. Legend says he put a spear into the flames and pressed the hot blade against his forehead to stay awake. He then drove the weapon into the goblin. As a reward for his feat, King Cormac granted anything he desired, and Fionn announced his heritage and requested his father be leader of the Fianna, which was granted. A different version of that tale says this was one of the 3 strenuous tests by King Cormac for Fionn to become leader of his clan. Now, this is part of the Celts' deeply stacked mythology, but as we know, most mythology, like any good story, has its anchor in reality, even if it's ever so tenuous a hold. Now, did Tara's court burn 23 years in a row? Maybe. The hill of Tara has been sanctified and desecrated since before the oldest of its more than 30 visible features now. The Mound of Hostages was constructed during the Neolithic era. It was sanctified as each generation added its own layers of new construction, as happens, as well as other layers of symbolic association. The new structures always demonstrated the most political strength of their builders, bolstered by the proximity of implied collaboration with now mythic ancestral spirits and the Hill of Tara. Combining the mythic with historical, as many as 142 different rulers may have reigned under the kingship of Tara. Was it the Samhain goblin causing all these fires and destruction? I guess we'll never know. Another story is of Nera. One ancient Samhain night, King Ailill and Queen Maeve of Connacht gathered their entire household, including warriors aplenty. As the men were feasting, Ailill made a strange request, one that sounded like a dare for his own amusement. The men had captured and executed 2 prisoners the prior day. Ailill declared that whoever went and placed a willow branch around the foot of one of the corpses that hung fresh from the gallows would get a fantastic prize. No one wanted to do this task. It was Samhain, after all, which meant the dead had power. The corpse could inflict untold damage on the living, should it wish to. Eventually, a few volunteers rose to the challenge, heading off into the dark, one by one. Each one made it only so far before running back, because great was the darkness of that night and its horror. Nera offered to go. Alil promised his gold-hilt sword should Nera succeed. Nera entered the darkness and carefully approached the hanging men, twisted a branch upon their ankles, and the willow branch popped off. He retied it again. It sprang off. A third time he put it on the ankle of the dead man, and it popped off. While picking it up off the ground, he heard one of the dead men cackle. He was doing it all wrong, the prisoner said. The twig needed a peg to hold it together. So Nera fastened a small peg, twisted the branch around it, and stuck it into the dead man's flesh. It worked, it held, and the prisoner congratulated him. After doing so, the prisoner said, "By the truth of thy valor, take me on thy neck, that I may get a drink with thee. I was very thirsty when I was hanged." Now, brave Nera said, "Come on my neck then, whither shall I carry thee?" "To the nearest house," replied the captive. So the two men, living and dead, went to the nearest house for a drink. Once they got there, they saw that it was surrounded by a lake of fire. Realizing that the people inside likely needed to use all their water to damp down the flames before bed, the prisoner decided they ought to try the next one. They crept towards another home, this one surrounded by a lake of water. "Do not go to that house," cried the captive. "There is never a washing nor bathing tub, nor a slop pail in it at night as they sleep." They continued to the third house. All seemed normal, and so they went inside. The occupants had left out vats for bathing and washing without dumping them. While the family slept, the dead men drank deeply from the vats. He then took his last mouthful and spit it all over the sleeping people, killing them instantly. Shooken, but unfazed, Nera took the prisoner back to the gallows and returned to the royal fort. What he saw when he got there shocked him. The entire hill on which the fort sat was aflame. Resting in the foreground was a giant pile of heads belonging to his fellow soldiers. Dumbstruck, Nera noticed another army moving away. He tried to follow them as they sank deeper into the mound they were marching on. And suddenly everything changed. In that moment, Nera realized he had left the earth and entered a strange other world, one that bordered the realm of the living. This Samhain he had crossed over. He was held captive by the fairies and held in the fairy mound until the following Samhain. Hope you found those old Celtic fairy tales interesting. You take time this Halloween to not just think about scary movies, candy, costumes, parties. Think about the other world. Think about your ancestors. They might be trying to slip through the veil. Is there an empty chair at your table? Is there room on your couch? Is there space on your bed? They may be visiting. I'll see you guys next time.